My name is Thais Winkelblack. I'm an ICFRC board member and host for today's program, and want to take a moment just to say thank you to our members, our volunteers, and most especially to our wonderful interns for helping make these forums possible. I also want to acknowledge our university and community supporters, the University of Iowa's international programs, the University of Iowa's honors program, the University of Iowa Public Policy Center, and the Stanley UI Foundation Support Organization for their financial support. And I thank today's special sponsors, Allison Kin Atkinson, Midwest One Bank, Alan Swanson of Blank & McCune Realtors. It's my pleasure now to introduce to you Pol Herrmann. Pol is the Bob and Kay Smith Professor of Entrepreneurship in the Department of Management at the Ivy College of Business at Iowa State University. Pol has a civic engineering degree from the Polytechnic National School in Quito, Ecuador, a master's degree in engineering management from Southern Management University in Dallas, Texas, and a Ph.D. in strategic management and international business from the University of Kansas. In his 20 years with Iowa State University, his primary teaching focus has been international management and strategic management of innovation. His research focuses on strategic leadership and innovation. International entrepreneurs face substantial challenges due to the physical and psychic distance they face in global markets, in which they confront dynamic environments, intense competition, and different local systems. Besides leadership and passion, foreign entrepreneurs need to articulate a rationale for internationalization, compete with large firms, create complex supply chains, and manage global organizations. Pol's research has identified the characteristics of top managers and entrepreneurs that lead to firms' internationalization, strategic flexibility, strategic change, and innovation. And his topic today is challenges of international experiences and entrepreneurship. Please join me in welcoming Pol Herrmann to the stage, to the podium.
Thank you very much.
So much.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for this invitation. I am honored to be in this beautiful city with this great university with all of my children are students. Because my family is here, I am very intimidated of making this presentation. And also because I'm a teacher, but I never use a microphone. So if at any time I start moving around, please make me some kind of sign that you cannot hear. But that time I have probably forgotten that I told you, and I will start waving to everyone. So please just tell me we can hear. We flew in a military plane with one engine, which was not working very well. So we had to stop in Iquitos, which is a city at the Amazonas, and we had to stay in a hotel. And I love it because I didn't have to clean up, I didn't have to do anything. So, and after that, I like hotels very much. I have been trying to convince my wife to move and live in a hotel, but she doesn't believe about my experience in Iquitos. Then when I studied, mainly to try to please my parents, I went into this, which is the best engineering school in Ecuador, the Polytechnic National School. And when I finished the 6 years of study, I already knew I wanted to have a master's degree, and went to the United Kingdom to a very nice hotel, kind of like in front of the beach. Then after that, I went to Saffron Walden, which is a city which is very close to Cambridge, went back to Ecuador. I had to do a one-year dissertation. I did it quickly in comparison to my classmates. So this is a 7-year program. And after that, I came to the... Then went to Southern Methodist University in Dallas, Texas. And as you can see here, I got my engineering degree in April and my engineering management degree in May. So I know you're thinking right now, this guy is a genius. But you're completely wrong. This was because of the lack of processes and standards in Ecuador. The president at that time didn't want to give me the degree if I was not present. And then my father, who had by that time become one of the most successful lawyers in Ecuadorian history, finally convinced him to give me the degree, because I had really finished in December, a year and a half before. So after that, I decided after the master's degree that I wanted to live in Paris. That is because when I was in Saffron Walden in England, I would often go to London. And I said, I have to live in one of these cities. So I went to live in Paris. You can see that was the Arc de Triomphe. That was my view in Paris. You can see that. And I like it so much that I decided to go 1 year to Austria. By that time, I wanted to learn some German. I was planning to go to Germany, but I made some friends from Austria. So I told my parents I'm going for a year. That convinced them I was completely lost, lots to drugs and unemployment. So from that perspective, they were right, because when I went to Ecuador, I couldn't get a job, because it was very difficult at that time to convince managers that an engineer wanted to work in marketing. Because I had this fantastic class in marketing at SMU, and I said, that's what I want to do. So I went to Ecuador, and the only one who gave me a job was my best friend. Then I instantly became the vice manager at Cosideco. He was selling computers. So instantly I became the second top manager. And that made me realize that if I stay there, I could never move up. Not to mention that I am not very good at selling anything. In every place I have lived, I buy TVs, furniture, I always give it away to friends or to people who need it. So finally, thanks to a famous uncle I had, I went to this Department of Housing, or Ministry of Housing, as we call it. And then I became the international coordinator. Partially because I was the only one who understood some English at that time. I don't know how they coordinated before I was there, because this was everything in conjunction with the IMF, with the BID, with international institutions. So I was trying to resign from the beginning. Finally, I did it. I got 5 jobs in a week. And then I went to Citibank, because at that time, the dream job for any person wanted to be manager was either to work at IBM or Citibank. So I went to Citibank. I learned a lot about banking, about how things operate. I know that because she's a banker. It's supposed to be one of the best first jobs for someone in business. I also had several international courses. I learned how Citibank worked. So after those 3 years, I said, I'm going to be an entrepreneur. So I had my own dealer. It was a dealer in insurance, and I also did consulting. But probably I was not ambitious enough. And then the largest insurance firm in Ecuador called me to be a marketing manager. So I went to work in this firm, and one day there was this little announcement in the newspaper saying, we need professors for a private university. Most universities in Ecuador at that time were public. So I went and I convinced this guy that even when I didn't have any formal experience, I could be a teacher. I said, I have given so many individual classes. I have taught summer classes in high school. I love it. I convinced him, and then I became the first management professor, and this, which is now one of the most respectable and successful universities. Even when at the time I went, they had only 80 students and a budget of $4,000. With those $4,000, the president got a loan for $4,000 of the dollars and got an $8,000 book, came to the United States and visited many universities and said, oh, listen, look, this is one of the latest books we've published. Because Ecuador is such a beautiful country with such an incredible landscape. It's a very small country, but in comparison to its size, the most biodiverse country on Earth. So we have beaches, jungles, mountains, rainforests, the Galapagos Island. So this became a very good university because they were not competing with Ecuadorian universities, but with American universities, with those parents who wanted to sell the kids to the United States. Then with that, they grew substantially and became as famous as they are now. So then after that, when I was in Austria, I realized that there were some people with doctoral degrees, and I said, okay, maybe if I get a doctoral degree, I can finish something in life. I can complete something. And then after teaching, I realized that to be an academic, it would be much better. I would be much better off if I could have a doctoral degree. So I went to KU. In the meantime, I went 3 weeks in Cambridge because I had convinced my wife to go to Cambridge. She was the best student, and she wanted to live in Europe. So I said, if you're so good, go to a good school. She said, they cannot admit me in Cambridge. I said, let me try. So at that time I typed the application. She was admitted, so I went to be with her the final 3 weeks of her time. Then I finished my degree in KU and was hired by Iowa State. I can tell you, my wife and I are very consistent. So we had children at the rate of one child per university. So we had one in Kansas, another one in Iowa State, and both of them are right now here at the University of Iowa. My son just arrived because he's a very busy freshman, but I'm very happy he's here. My life at Iowa State. I was hired to teach international management. That was my main job. Over time, I moved to innovation because that was my passion, partially because after many years of academic, I read that if you hear any president from any place, they said innovation is the engine of growth. The same is entrepreneurship. We say in entrepreneurship, innovation is the engine of entrepreneurship. In all these years, I have been also teaching in Ecuador. Coincidentally, I was recommended by an Iowa State professor because he was the best one we had, the most distinguished, and he was teaching agribusiness in Ecuador. And then he told him, I have a colleague who is from Ecuador. Then they invited me, and one of the things I saw that even when we think that in developing countries, in Latin American countries, there are no processes, as I was telling you. This university here, that's the IDE Business School, that's a view from Guayaquil, my hometown, is an extremely well-organized university. It was funded under the guidance of Harvard, has associations with several schools, U.S.A. in Spain, which is a very well-known, but also IPALDE, INALDE, several ones in Argentina, Mexico, Colombia. So it's been a fantastic experience for me to teach executive education with an American perspective and learn more about my own culture. I also went to Italy a couple of summers. CIMBA is the Consortium of International Management Business Association. At that time, it was run by Kansas. Right now, it's run by the University of Iowa. It's a fantastic program that emphasizes leadership. I also went for 3 years at Monterrey Tech. Usually, it's called just as Tech because here in the US, you are so busy that you don't have time to pronounce the whole words, and then it's just tech. But it's a great school. I was promoting research. And one day, a good friend of mine, who is the director of the World Languages and Cultures Department, told me, Paul, listen, I have been inviting your management professors to come teach in Valencia. But they no longer want to come because I cannot pay a salary. Could you give it a try? I said, sure, I can go to Spain. I speak Spanish. I don't have an accent in Spanish, by the way. And then I gave it 5 tries because Valencia is an amazingly beautiful city that has a nice historic downtown. It has beaches. It has amazing gardens to work in a river bed that they deviated. So it's a great place. So it's been interesting for me to learn also from Valencia. They speak Spanish, but they have a different pronunciation. For instance, in Valencia, there are 2 different vowels. In Latin America, we say Valencia. In Spain, they would say Valencia. So the pronunciation is different. Then when I told you I'm a regular guy, that I'm not a genius, if you're not convinced, I can convince you I am even below average, because I accepted to be department chair, which is widely known as the worst job in the university. So I did it. I thought I would like it a little bit, but I am not a political person. I always say what I think. And as my wife had told me, you don't have the patience to be department chair. So one of the advice is always listen to your wife. So after 4 years, I went back to be a regular / happy faculty member. And I also became director of entrepreneurship programs because of my research on innovation and many entrepreneurship samples I have used. And it's very exciting because right now it's one of the most important programs, if not the most important, at Iowa State. Also here is very important. You know, the Department of Management and Organizations changed the name. Right now it's Department of Management and Entrepreneurship. So I'm very happy of being involved with such a program. Okay. I'm sorry I talk so much about myself. But now let me talk about my research. This is what I do. The influence of strategic leadership in strategic outcomes. That is the perspective. Just for you to see how we look at leadership. Leadership is about followers. Is about people having a vision that they try to translate into reality. Think Bill Gates, a computer in every desktop. Is about empowering people. Is about influence. Is about maximizing what others do. So for me, this, I think, is a very exciting topic. I do it at the strategic leadership, which is basically what the leaders of a firm do. The general manager or CEO, top managers, and even the board of directors. This was my dissertation. You can see it's leadership and international diversification, mainly demographic characteristics, that is age, the time people have been in a position, experience, the functional background, whether they were in finance or in marketing, and how that may determine what people do. In Spanglish, this would be like, I wanted to see why is that some firms are more international than others. Why is that they have a higher degree of internationalization? then up to what extent that internationalization is determined by the CEO and the top management team. And I also look in terms of what we call entry strategy or entry mode, how good firms determine whether they export or they have a joint venture, or if they decide and establish a subsidiary in a foreign country. So this was the main topic of my dissertation. These were the key findings. If you see, is that firms are likely to be more international. That is, to enter more countries, to have more sales, to have more subsidiaries, in general, more operations, when the CEOs are younger, because people over age prefer not to take as many risks, more educated, because with education we learn to make plans and to feel confident about those plans, and to have more international experience. That's something I will talk a little bit more later. We usually prefer to do something we have done before. Then people who have international experience feel comfortable going abroad again. I also look at CEO successors. This was related to the entry mode. So you can see here, successors with international experience, longer position, backgrounds in marketing, sales, research and development, and also entrepreneurship, prefer to have more control. So wholly owned subsidiaries over joint ventures over strategic alliances. And at that time, I also found that those firms were likely to be more successful. When executives have a wholly owned subsidiary, they have a lot more control, but also a lot more risk. And I will talk more about that when I talk specifically about entrepreneurship. So you're going to say, this guy has been talking for 18 minutes and 59 seconds and doesn't mention entrepreneurship. You know that in the academia we live and die by the publications. And then I was sending my wonderful papers, and I would always get the comment that I am not going into the black box. At the beginning, I didn't know what that meant, but basically they were saying that talking about age and education, functional background, that was not enough. And then that forced me to study personality. And then I studied this, which is called the big 5 factor of personality, that you can see is how whether people are neurotic or the opposite is emotionally stable, how extrovert they are, how open they are to experience, how agreeable, how nice, how pleasant they are with others, and also how conscientious they are, how much they think about what they want to do, how much they plan, they focus on the task. This was great for me because I was able to publish my best 2 publications, and we did this with a group of entrepreneurships. After that, I moved to a more specific topic of entrepreneurship, which is entrepreneurial orientation. That is how innovative, willing to take risk, proactive firms can be. And I did this with the first student we have in the Ph.D. in marketing. And we found out that firms are more oriented to entrepreneurship when they use more the marketing function. So first of all, when they try to prevent the trends in the market, they see what is going on, they try to see what the preferences are, then they can develop innovations in the firm. Then from the innovations, there are other marketing capabilities, which are the ones of commercialization. You have probably heard a common framework in marketing, which is the marketing mix, the famous 4 Ps in marketing: the product, the price, the promotion, the physical distribution. So this was the first time that we joined innovation and marketing, that according to Peter Drucker, who is one of the most prolific writers in management, are the only 2 real functions in management. He says that all the others are just costs. In general, when people have studied personality and innovation, these are the key findings. So firms are likely to be more innovative when the CEO focuses on the present and the future rather than in the past, when they are proactive, when they are confident, optimistic, adaptable, sensitive, but also when they are narcissistic. I know exactly what you're thinking. But I am not talking about anyone in particular. This is because with narcissistic managers, they feel they are the best. They feel they can do anything. They are very confident. And because of that, in some special type of innovations, when they are radical innovations, breakthrough, usually firms don't want to do it because it's a lot of risk. But narcissistic CEOs, they say, I can do it. And in fact, usually it takes someone with a strong personality to do it. And that's why this is one of the interesting findings in this literature. Now, a little bit about entrepreneurship. What is entrepreneurship? That in the simplest decision is, do I prefer the safety of a job? Or do I take the risk of exploring something new, trying to have an enterprise? So let me give you the napkin explanation. I'm sure sometimes you are especially with engineers. I am, as I told you, I'm an engineer. So when I explain something, I usually take a piece of paper and I start explaining. So this is the napkin explanation. So it usually starts with an innovation, a new idea that people try to make profit of. Make a plan, take risk, and you see, do it again. It takes a lot of persistence. Some people say to make money, others to solve a problem in the community. That famous professor I told you in marketing at SMU, he used to say, the most important word in marketing is need. If there is a need, you can have a successful marketing program. Then they get ideas from different places. And if you think about famous entrepreneurs, right now we see they are running huge firms, but they always started with an idea, increased the idea, and persisted until they were successful. Now, what is that entrepreneurs need? Usually, when we think of an entrepreneur, we think of a person, a single individual doing everything by herself. But the entrepreneur needs what is called an ecosystem. Accessible markets, they need human capital, family, friends, and finance. Some people say it's family, friends, and fools, people who are willing to take the risk, support systems, even from a cultural perspective, a regulatory framework in which to operate, education and training, universities. And we think I focus on the ones I think are the most important, because I think it's always first about the people. So these are called the human pillar. So it's basically a human capital. So to find talent, to find people who can help the entrepreneur take the enterprise ahead, people with experience. Very often to see if there are immigrants when they go to some countries. They need a mentor system. First of all, the family, those friends, mentors. Most of us need someone to tell us at the beginning how to do things. You see in universities, we have research parks, accelerators. So in general, a network from which entrepreneurs can operate. And of course, education and training. As I mentioned, Iowa and Iowa State are right now focusing on entrepreneurship to promote this idea among our students. Cultural support to see how willing are people to take the the risk, because you think of the students, do I go to the multinational or do I go to this entrepreneur who is telling me that she has that great idea and we are going to be rich? Because we need to remember that most businesses are not successful. And then innovation. And you see, I leave this because this is about entrepreneurship, but applies equally to international. One day, an international executive from Principal came to ISU and was talking about international experience, and he asked, what do you think is the most important trait to succeed in international business? So think of one. I ask you, all of you, to think, one do you think is the most important one? Because that day in the audience, we did not get it. To fail, the capability to fail and then to get up and try again. Because you think when we are international, we are always somehow fail. Some people like me, we have an accent. People don't understand me many times. I have been trying to adapt. If you ask people, there is something people never adapt to, and that is the food. If you ask any person who is foreign born, you never adapt to the food, to the time of the food. We always eat differently, and we are always failing because we have a different culture. Here, I think my colleagues have shaken my hands probably 4 times every time I have been promoted. In Ecuador, we hug each other. My wife is very brave. She hugs everyone all the time. But I am very shy. You remember I was telling you I studied the big 5 personality factors. So there are studies comparing entrepreneurs with managers to see what is the difference. And you can see the main difference are in openness to experience. Well, I should start with neuroticism. Yes, entrepreneurs are not as neurotic, but that's very easy to understand. Because if you have a boss, you end up being neurotic. If you don't believe me, ask me all my experiences working with a boss for 4 years. The other one is openness to experience, because the entrepreneur doesn't have that safety, needs to take risk, is all new, is all exploration, is all uncertainty. And this is a very interesting fact, the one of conscientiousness, of agreeableness, because we always think it's very nice to be nice to others, to be kind. But in management, usually the results are negative, and in entrepreneurship is even lower. So managers, entrepreneurs, they need to be tough. So they need to complete tasks, they need to have discipline, they need to have rules, they have objectives, they want to get the objectives. And in conscientiousness, yes, it's higher because people need to have a plan, need to see how they will convince many other people to give them money, and they need to think how to change the plan when the plan doesn't work. In a study in Harvard, with all successful entrepreneurs, they found out that 95% of all those successful entrepreneurs change strategies. So there is always change in entrepreneurship. What does it take to be a successful entrepreneur? I can summarize it to you. It's everything. You can see it's ability to take risk. Yeah, they need to take risk. Remember, I told you that entrepreneurship starts with an innovation or with an idea, with something new, with something that satisfies a need. Knowledge in several areas. I'm not saying one needs to have this from the beginning, but at least entrepreneurs need to acquire it, about manufacturing, marketing, about business. The ability to cooperate. because remember the cultural support, the people, the network, the money to convince people to work with them is about cooperation. Of course, the need to achieve. Usually, entrepreneurs have an internal locus of control. This is a measure of personality. People with external locus of control are those who blame the others, the environment, the boss, the circumstances. They don't take responsibility. Internal locus of control is those people who accept if something happens, it's because of me. I did something wrong. I didn't prevent something. They assume. That is what entrepreneurs do. If they wouldn't accept that they are committing a mistake, they would not make any change. And of course, adaptability. And this is one study I did. I haven't been able to publish yet. Is about another measure of personality, which is self-monitoring, which is about the adaptability, which we found out that is highly related to innovation in a large sample of technological firms in India. In self-monitoring, we make the analogy. I don't know if I can pronounce this right, but you can see the arm as a chameleon, the chameleon. Camaleon in Spanish, that animal that changes colors according to the circumstance. The self-monitor also adapts to the circumstance, and with everything I'm telling you, the entrepreneur needs to adapt. Why do entrepreneurs become internationals? Why do they cross borders? Some people categorize this into defensive and into offensive. So the defensive reason is just because they need to globalize the business. You see, it's because maybe manufacturing is less expensive or more efficient in Mexico or in China, because service is probably better in the United States, because delivery is probably better in Germany. And you can see this firm here. Inverness Medical is a firm of former executives of Johnson & Johnson. They took some medical equipment that Johnson was not interested, and they start operations. They were from 3 different countries in Europe, and then that was the way to start the business. Offensive reasons. That is one, because of the business opportunities, they need to be in different countries. This is an extreme example from every perspective. This Racing the Planet is a firm that they say they stage marathons, but you know the marathon is 26 miles, but they have races that are about 160 miles. Then to make it interesting to those runners, they do it in the Tama deserts in Chile, in Mongolia, in the Sahara desert, and then they sell backpacks, energy fluids, all the equipment that these racers need. And they operate in a small office in Hong Kong, but they have these huge international operations. Challenges of international entrepreneurship. First of all is the distribution, the marketing strategy. If we think that they need to go across borders, they are going to other countries, so they don't have a channel, they don't have the infrastructure, they don't have the contact. They need to market those 4 P's of the price, the product, the physical promotion, distribution. They need to do that in a foreign country with systems that they don't know. And they need to compete with local firms that are very well established in the market, sometimes with multinationals. In developing countries, it's common. In Ecuador, that's the case. In Korea, in Japan, that there are very powerful family groups These are groups that are highly diversified. They have lots of businesses in different sectors of the economy. They are very closely related to the government. So very often, entrepreneurs need to build alliance with those. This is the entry strategy I was telling you, that they need to decide whether to go with a joint venture or a wholly owned subsidiary or any other entry model. I'm going to dedicate a whole slide to that because that's probably the only thing I really know something about, because that was my dissertation. Then the distance, the physical distance, or how far away countries are, that is also reflected in the infrastructure. These entrepreneurs, when they start, usually they don't have the infrastructure to start doing the business. Because of my research, for me, the psychic distance is very important, because very, very often that comes from the culture, from the language, from the different habits, from the different ways of negotiating and communicating that people have in different countries. Then we have the context. Different governments, different stabilities, different regulations, different laws, different systems with labor. In many places, you just cannot fire anyone. And in many of those places, it's difficult to find that talent. So firms need to move executives from one place to the next. And of course, these firms usually don't have the skills, the resources to compete with multinationals or in general with larger companies. Talking exclusively about entry strategies, and here I'm signaling just the main points, because I don't want to bore you reciting my whole dissertation, but if you see, in export, it's about knowledge of the market. Because the entrepreneur is shipping something to a country abroad, they may have an agent, hire an export management consulting firm, have a subsidiary, but they don't get to understand the market. Not to mention the transportation cost, the reluctance to import. That's why we have right now this trade war, because we're trying to, or not we, I shouldn't say we, the president is trying to reduce imports from other countries. There is always that mentality in every country of the world, because export means revenues, imports means cost. Then strategic alliances. This is about the different legal entities, but I mentioned partners because I think that's the most important, because sometimes they have different objectives. They join to you, but you want to grow the business, and the other firm wants to do something else. Komatsu came many years ago to the United States, made a joint venture with Dresser. It seemed to be perfect, but Komatsu wanted to grow the business. Dresser just considered a small, separate business, so they never understood each other. Not to mention that the Japanese wanted to work Fridays after 5 p.m. And I can tell you, I work with faculty after 5 p.m. You will never find an American in their offices. Never. They work very hard. But Friday, 5 p.m., I'm still trying to understand why. But Japanese couldn't understand. Then the wholly owned subsidiary, usually for an entrepreneur, is a startup. They start all from zero. So that is the access. How do they enter the foreign country? If they need to buy a piece of land, have a building, hire people, it is very difficult. At the same time, if they do it, this is the best learning entry mode. This is the one with the most profitable potential, but obviously the one that takes the longer time, and that is the risk, the one with more risk. So this is the whole world. For Johnson & Johnson to enter Canada, it took them 33 years. Now there is a different type of entrepreneur. It's called the born global, those people who are instantly entrepreneurs, that they just start doing a business from their location and they don't go anywhere. A young, bright, charming guy from Nigeria contacted me 2 weeks ago because he wants to have a business in Africa, because he says that Africans prefer to avoid going to the tailor, but they like customized suits. So he's trying to have a website and an app so that he can offer customized suits and avoiding people going to the tailor. I chose this example, the Microfinance International, because this is the example of a Japanese who was in his 50s, but I mention knowledge because he had lived in Mexico, and then he knew that Mexico sent lots of money to their own country. But they are not treated well for those bankers, because in many of these economies, there are not systems. They don't offer loans unless they have assets, which they don't. They charge them very high interest rates. So they offer banking, checking, financing to these people. And if you go to the world of microfinance, sometimes these people need $20, $50, and then they can start selling something and become entrepreneurs. If we talk about competencies, you see this is basically the description of what entrepreneurship is. Identify opportunities, garner resources, the funding, find a deal, a vision, leadership, to have passion. The first student in our Ph.D. is doing his dissertation based on entrepreneurial passion. And don't worry, I'm checking the time. This is my last slide, so we're doing fine. What international entrepreneurs additionally need is they need to find a reason for being international, which articulate a global purpose. So why do they need the economies of scale, the portfolio of products, to decide whether they are going to be a pioneer or if they are going to follow someone, to build alliances? You see, I choose this example. I don't know if you can read Trolltech, a Norwegian firm selling open software. They had to build an alliance with Japanese. And talking about culture again, it was about to fail because when they had a deadline, the Japanese wanted to meet during the Christmas break. And Norwegian said, no. In Norway, we celebrate Christmas. It was about to fail because of that, to create a supply chain, as I told you, to manage a global organization. And, in personal characteristics, I could tell you many of the current research in entrepreneurship, but it's all about the person. It's about cognition. I recently signed to be part of a new group that's going to start in the Academy of Management, my main association, which is about neuroscience, to investigate the brain, the nervous system, and how that affects how people make decisions. But what is the most accepted vision is that it's about cultural intelligence. And right now we are measuring this, the capability of people to act in diverse environments with a diversity of people, because at the end, that is what international entrepreneurship is all about. Thank you very much.
Here's a questioner who wants to know if any of your research or experience has given you any evidence that certain countries, that entrepreneurs from certain countries are more successful or try more than in other countries, or if there's no real cultural difference from that point of view.
Thank you. Now I feel very comfortable, because this is common for me. My students always run away when I start talking. And the ones who stay are the smartest ones who ask me questions I cannot answer. No, there are differences. Of course, there are differences. One way to look at this is from a cultural perspective. And there is a common measure in entrepreneurship, which is the individualism versus collectivism. Individualism are those societies in which the individual is the most important. In collectivistic, everything is the group. We need consensus, decisions by the group. And then the most individualistic country on earth is the United States. At the same time, is the most entrepreneurial country in the world. So there is called the Global Entrepreneurship Index that measures how entrepreneurs are, and the United States is number one. So there are differences. I tell you that which is the most visible one.
And just kind of a follow-up on that, Pol, you talked about the infrastructure required for entrepreneurship. Does the infrastructure in various countries come to bear in whether or not entrepreneurs are really able to get off the ground?
Thank you very much. Yes, the successful entrepreneurs, they are the ones who can make it. Because if we think that the process of an entrepreneur needs to go to a foreign country. Imagine that an American entrepreneur goes to Ecuador and then needs to start delivering products. It's almost impossible to start building the infrastructure from scratch. That is when the building alliances comes into place. So they need to find other entrepreneurs in Ecuador, build partnerships, and then use the infrastructure that other people are using. In most cases, that is the normal way to do it. Here also, because of time, I didn't expand much, but remember I was talking about the psychic distance. Entrepreneurs usually prefer to start doing business in a place they feel familiar. I was going to talk about this company in Puerto Rico, which is Encantos de Puerto Rico. If you think the logical thing would be to come to the United States, it's so close, they can legally come, but they went to Spain because they felt that they were much closer to them. So in terms of infrastructure, they start buying those little cafes from Spain that were already established, because here is when we go to the startup to start buying locations. It would take forever to start understanding what is the best location to place. So they start building the infrastructure there. When they knew the business, then they came to the United States. Where do you think they went? Miami, where, as you know, no one speaks English.
This questioner is noting that in the Sunday New York Times this past Sunday, there was a report that CEOs of successful startups on average were 42 years old. Can you comment on that?
Oh my God. Do I have 45 more minutes? There is a standard image of CEOs. Usually, they are about 4 years old. They usually are 6 feet tall, blonde, good looking. That is the idea of CEOs. So it's hard to predict up to what point is because of the good looks is that they became CEOs. That would explain to me, because I never became a CEO. Because there are, of course, many other factors. But this article mainly referred to large firms. Because if we think that one can finish college at 22, master's degree at 24, then in large firms it may take 10, 15 years of experience to make it to the top. That is right for CEOs. For entrepreneurs, they are CEOs from the beginning.
These were startups.
Well, that's probably when they grow. It starts when they start. Is like the example I said of the medical equipment. These are not the students we see that they start a business. They are people who already have the contacts. Those startups usually come from what some people call spin-offs. That are people who have been working in a large firms, and then they have the startup, because that is the one type. But there are hundreds and hundreds of executives whom I could say students who start the business when they are 22 years old.
Some more questions that are sort of about some demographics. This person would like you to comment, if you will, about women entrepreneurs versus male entrepreneurs, if you have any information related to that.
Yeah, I can tell you the one I know most about. I barely mentioned microfinancing. That is probably the largest group, the one with the highest growth. That, I'm sure you heard about the Grameen Bank that started in Bangladesh with Mahid Yunus. He started this idea, and then when they went to entrepreneurs, a large number of them were women, because these were people who were doing something at home, selling things in the market. And at that time, the idea was that poor people would never pay on time, or just would never pay, that they could never move up, and of course that women don't work. So in that case, we know that it's a majority of women. For instance, I have a student working exactly on gender difference, but focusing on imitation, and he sees that men are more likely to imitate. So I think in this field is a constant discovery that goes ahead, or I should say at the same time, with the movement of women in the world.
So with that, I would just like to, again, say thank you to our sponsors, the University of Iowa's International Programs, the University of Iowa's Honors Program, the University of Iowa Public Policy Center, the Stanley UI Foundation Support Organization, as well as our individual sponsors, Allison Ken Atkinson, Midwest One Bank, and Alan Swanson of Blank & McCune Realtors. And a big thank you to City Channel 4, as always, for making our programs available for viewing audiences. And Pol, you may know this from your child who was an intern with ICFRC, but we would like to present you with a very coveted ICFRC mug.
Thank you very much.
For coffee, tea, or any other beverage of your pleasure. Many thanks.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
So appreciative of your comments today, and thank you to everyone in our audience, and we bid you good day and hope to see you soon. Bye.